Welcome to Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management. I'm Robert Gilliland.
I'm Karen Hyder.
Welcome. Hey, I just got back from the Forbes Top Advisor Summit. One of the topics that was absolutely huge that we've had more and more people mention and talk about is direct indexing.
Yep.
It's kind of the topic du jour out there. What is direct indexing?
Yep. So let's start there. Let's talk a little bit more about what direct indexing is.
So direct indexing, you know how you can buy a mutual fund, the S&P 500 mutual fund, or you can buy an exchange traded fund, the ETF, SPY, and that is an index that is an investment meant to mimic the index.
Yep.
Direct indexing is where you actually go and buy a piece of all those companies or build out a portfolio. In the case of the S&P 500, it potentially could be 500 companies that you have inside your portfolio that mimic the S&P 500. Does that make sense?
It does. So I have a lot of questions on it. I feel like this may or may not be for everybody. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons of it and who it's for.
Yeah, well, so the pros are is that you're going to get, there's a lot of pros to it. You're going to get the return of the index. Here's the other thing that's really great. If you want to build out a diversified portfolio and build a benchmark that is large company stocks, small company stocks, international stocks, you can go and build and actually own all of those companies. So you can, as opposed to just buying SPY, you can buy, and you could build a portfolio with mutual funds or ETFs inside of there, but there are expenses that are involved with that. Doing a direct index, you actually own the companies. You actually receive the dividends. You actually get those investments that are inside there. And so as an example, let's say that you didn't want to own any stocks in a certain company or in a certain industry. Let's assume that you retired from a energy company, since we're right here in the middle of the energy corridor, and you already have a large concentration of an energy company. Yeah. Well, you could build that index and not have that company in there, so you're not overweighted, so that portfolio could be done. So who does this make sense for, and who does this not make sense for? The types of accounts where these investments make the most sense really is inside of taxable accounts. So your IRAs, your 401ks, your Roth IRAs, this is you're probably not going to get as much of an advantage, and here's why. In that taxable account, when you are direct indexing, it gives you the ability to tax efficiently manage that portfolio. All right. What that means is that if you have a company that is at a loss, you have other companies that are at gains, you can offset the two by selling the loser and selling the winner, and the capital gains you can minimize the effect of capital gains.
Yep. So more control over each of the individual investments and how you're going to utilize them for tax purposes and be tax efficient. That's
right. And what they call that tax alpha, or tax out because of the management, tax out performance. And they go through, and there's you can actually tailor it the way that you want to. The other advantage is that if you have a taxable portfolio that has a significant number of capital gains, and you really want to have better diversification, you can take that portfolio, working with a manager, and move that portfolio over and tell them you want a direct index that mimics 75% the S&P 500 and 25% the Russell 2000 or small cap. They'll take that, and then you give them a budget for tax. I only want to have X number of dollars worth of capital gains by the end of the year. And so over time, they'll gradually move that portfolio where they can realize a loss and realize a gain over to get you into that position. Right? And so there's some really good, it allows you to customize that portfolio. It allows for you to manage the taxes which become vitally important. It also allows you to broadly diversify.
I would say the diversification especially, yep.
Another thing that ends up happening inside of there is it really gives you the ability to really personalize. You may have some values that you want to ensure that you don't own those companies, and it really gives you the ability to do that. Whether it is, there's lots of different ways. You don't want to own liquor companies, just as an example. You can make sure that you don't own liquor companies. A couple things also you need to think about is that generally, in order for this to make sense for someone, it really has to be a larger dollar amount.
So that's what I was going to ask. What are some of the drawbacks? Why would this not, outside of the retirement side that we've already talked about, in a taxable account, who might this not make sense for?
Well, it takes a larger dollar amount inside of taxable accounts in order to be able to do that. Okay. So that's probably first and foremost. You have to, the other thing you have to remember is if I go and buy the SPY, there's a thing called tracking error. What the market actually does and what that index fund does. Yep. You run the potential with the tax management as well as the personalization. You run the potential to not track that index as closely as what just owning some index mutual fund. Yep. Right? Because you may say, I don't want to have any more energy, and because I've got it all inside my retirement account. Well,
energy is the outperformer. And
energy is the one that does well. Now that can work the other way too. If energy is the one that underperforms inside there, so you just have to be aware. The other thing is that depending on where it is, and depending on how much management actually happens inside of there, it can potentially be more expensive than just owning that ETF. All the studies go and show that doing direct indexing actually, because of the outperformance on the tax side, actually ends up outperforming by a significant amount. Yep. Some other things that you can do with direct indexing is that you can personalize that index, right? Meaning you look at, you might be able to take a group of benchmarks and mimic that group and get a diversified portfolio. Of course, this is all equities. Get a diversified portfolio that truly is a global portfolio, so you are completely diversified inside there. And for people who are especially sustainable minded, direct indexing really does make it so that you really do have a lot more control, because you really don't, and opens up the opportunities for you inside there. If you're going to go and build it yourself, there could be additional costs that could make it a lot more expensive. Generally, we do it through a process that makes it a lot cheaper for people in the long run. The real advantage to direct indexing is controlling the taxes inside there.
Awesome.
So kind of with that, I think to kind of pull this all together, when you're going through and looking at your taxable monies, if you have significant assets that are in taxable accounts and you've got significant number of capital gains and maybe a portfolio that almost becomes a bit unwieldy, it makes sense to evaluate whether or not direct indexing makes sense for you. The advantages to direct indexing are the tax efficiency that cannot be understated. The ability to have higher control cannot be understated. To be able to go in there to help you go to hit your goals, those are advantages. Disadvantages is that you may not track those indexes as easily, right? And you do have to have a significant amount of money in order for this to truly go to make sense because of costs that are involved with that tax overlay. I just think that direct indexing, especially with it being such a hot topic out there, I think it makes sense to understand and explore whether or not it makes sense.
Yep, and sometimes just hearing other options and finding out something you've never heard before and taking it and looking to see if it makes sense for you is impactful.
And so with that, I want to say thank you for joining us this week on Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management, and we will see you next week.
See you next time.